All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about Pope Pius XII, a man who led the Catholic Church for nearly 2 decades, right through some of the most chaotic times in history. I mean, we're talking World War II, the Holocaust, and the start of the Cold War. It's no surprise his legacy is one of the most hotly debated of the entire 20th century.
And when I say debated, I mean the two sides are worlds apart. You've got his harshest critics who call him Hitler's pope, basically accusing him of being a silent partner in genocide. And then you have his defenders who see a saintly figure, a master diplomat, doing everything he could in a totally impossible situation. So which one is it? That's the huge question we're going to try and unpack here.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start by looking at his rise to power as a diplomat. Then we'll dive right into that controversial silence during the war. After that, we'll see how he shifted gears to fight a new enemy in the Cold War, explore his big impact on Catholic beliefs, and finally, we'll ask, is a final verdict even possible?
You know, before he was Pope Pius XII, he was Eugenio Pacelli, and his entire career was as a Vatican diplomat. This is so crucial to remember because it means he saw the world through the lens of politics, treaties, and statecraft. That was his world.
And man, did he rise fast. He spent more than a decade as the Vatican's top guy in Germany, so he knew the country inside and out. Then he becomes the Vatican's top diplomat, the Cardinal Secretary of State. It was in that job that he negotiated the super controversial Reichskonkordat with Nazi Germany. Then, in March 1939, he's elected Pope, just 6 months before Hitler invades Poland. The timing is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and listen to what Hitler himself said about that deal. For the Vatican, they probably saw it as a practical move to protect the church in a country that was becoming really hostile. But for the Nazis, it was a massive win. It was their first big international agreement. It gave them legitimacy. In return, the Vatican basically shut down Germany's powerful Catholic political party, getting rid of a major source of opposition. And Hitler saw it as a green light for his struggle against international Jewry.
Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of the whole controversy, his actions, or maybe his lack of action during World War II and the Holocaust. This is the period that has put his entire papacy, everything he did, under a microscope.
So this quote is from his Christmas address in 1942. It's the one his supporters always point to. But just listen to the words. He talks about hundreds of thousands of people suffering because of their nationality or race. It's so vague, so diplomatic. He never not once says the word Nazi. He never not once says the word Jew. And this is at a time when the Vatican absolutely knew what the final solution was.
And the gap between those cautious words and the horrifying reality is just staggering. In late 1943, the Nazis rounded up over 1,000 Jews in Rome itself, literally right under the Pope's windows. Of those 1,000+ people, only 15 survived. And still, no public protest from the Pope.
So you have to ask, why? Why the public silence? Well, his defenders have a few key arguments. They say he was afraid the Nazis would just invade the Vatican, that speaking up would only make things worse for Catholics across Europe. That quiet, back-channel diplomacy was the only way to get anything done. And this is a big one, they argue he saw Soviet communism as the real long-term enemy, an even bigger threat than Nazism.
But his critics? They offer a much darker explanation. They point to a long, ugly history of anti-Semitism baked into Christianity itself, the whole Christ killer narrative that went on for centuries. They argue that this created a kind of theological blind spot, where the systematic murder of the Jewish people just didn't spark the same level of moral outrage as, say, a direct threat to the church.
So once the war ends and Nazism is defeated, Pius XII immediately pivots. There's a new global enemy, a new conflict that's going to define the entire second half of his time as Pope, the Cold War. Suddenly, the world map is split in two, East versus West, communism versus capitalism. For Pius, who had always seen communism as this profound evil threat, this was a clear call to action for the Catholic Church. And he did not mess around. He positioned the church as the frontline defense against atheistic communism. He actually excommunicated any Catholic who joined a communist party. He threw the church's immense political weight behind anti-communist parties, especially in Italy. This became his new crusade. But it wasn't all geopolitics. Pius XII also made some huge, lasting changes to Catholic theology. He was all about reinforcing tradition in a world that was changing at lightning speed. The year 1950 was a really big one for this. He dropped a major papal letter, an encyclical, and he also declared a brand new infallible dogma. Both of these moves would really shape the direction of modern Catholicism.
So the encyclical Humani Generis was basically a shot across the bow. You had all these new ideas floating around after the war, like existentialism, and Pius saw them as a threat to the faith. This letter was his way of telling theologians, hey, let's pull back and stick to the classics. It was about consolidating and protecting traditional church doctrine.
And then you have the Assumption of Mary. Now, this was an old belief, very popular among ordinary Catholics, but Pius decided to make it official, capital D doctrine. He polled bishops around the world, and look at that. He got almost unanimous approval. So he used the power of papal infallibility, which is rarely done, to declare it an undeniable truth of the faith, that Mary was taken up, body and soul, into heaven. It was a huge moment for Marian devotion.
So, how in the world do you put all this together? You've got the diplomat, the wartime pope, the cold warrior, the enforcer of dogma. His story isn't just one thing, it's this incredibly complex tapestry of all these different roles. The thing is, you can't look at Pius XII in a vacuum. His entire papacy was forged in what historians call the Age of Extremes. He had to steer the church through totalitarianism, a world war, genocide, and a nuclear standoff. It's just an insane period of history.
For decades, this whole debate has been raging, a lot of it based on rumor and incomplete records. But then, in March of 2020, the game completely changed. The Vatican finally, after all this time, opened the complete archives from his pontificate to researchers. We're talking millions and millions of pages of documents that no one had ever seen before.
And that leaves us with the ultimate question. Now that historians are digging through this mountain of new evidence, is the story going to change? Will we find documents that prove he was a secret hero? Or will the archives just confirm the worst fears of his critics? The final verdict on the Pope of the Age of Extremes, well, it's still being written.